Hi, this is Travis Shaw with the Virginia Piedmont Heritage Area, coming to you today from the historic Warrenton Cemetery in the heart of Warrenton, Virginia. And this video will be the first in a series today celebrating Veterans Day. Now, Veterans Day is primarily a holiday celebrating those living veterans who are still with us, thanking them for their service. But today we're going to be going through and talking about the lives of various historical veterans who fought in America's earlier wars, and how they relate to our heritage area. So here in the Warrenton Cemetery, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk about the War of 1812, one of America's kind of forgotten conflicts. It does not get the attention that later wars get. It's kind of overshadowed by a lot of larger conflicts, but it's still a very important moment in early American history. So when the war is declared in 1812, Virginia is really not at the forefront of the conflict. The heavy fighting through the first few years of the war are going to be in places like the western frontier, the Canadian frontier, out at sea. But the war is going to come home for Virginians in 1814, when the British dispatch a large fleet, expeditionary force, to the Chesapeake Bay. Now this brings the war right to the Virginians' doorstep. These British sailors, Marines, are going to be raiding up and down the coast of the Chesapeake Bay. Basically anywhere the water touches is fair game for the British, because they have the largest, most powerful, most experienced navy in the world at the time. So these expeditions are going to be burning, looting, they're going to be liberating enslaved people all up and down the Chesapeake Bay from Maryland, Virginia. This is going to cause a panic throughout the state of Virginia, and Virginia's militias will be called out to respond. And that is going to include the militias from up here in the Piedmont. Militiamen from Loudoun County, from Prince William County, Fauquier County are going to be marched east to respond to this threat. And they're going to play a role in several of the important battles of the Chesapeake Bay campaigns, including the defense of Washington, the Battle of Bladensburg, and the defense of Baltimore, including the attack on Fort McHenry, which has been immortalized in the Star-Spangled Banner. But the particular individual I want to talk about today here in Warrenton was not in the militia, so his experience is a little different from most of the men from the heritage area, and that is a guy named Robert Hamilton. Robert Hamilton was actually a native of Maryland. He was from Baltimore originally. And before the war, he is going to serve as a merchant sailor. So he's an experienced seaman, and that is going to come in handy in 1814 when the British arrive in the Chesapeake. Now, the American Navy in the War of 1812 is a professional force, but it is a very, very small force, just a handful of frigates and some other smaller vessels. So how do you go up against the most powerful navy in the world? Well, here in the Chesapeake Bay, they're going to create what is known as the Chesapeake Bay Flotill under the command of Joshua Barney. Now, this is a fascinating organization, very, very ragtag, I guess is the term you'd use. Barney is going to draw upon experienced merchant sailors, people like Hamilton. He's going to call upon naval personnel, free men of color, Marines, put together basically any able-bodied, experienced man he can find in Maryland and Virginia. And they're going to man a set of small warships. Most of them are rowed galleys. So if you actually think back to the types of ships you imagine in ancient Rome or ancient Greece, these long, narrow ships, lots and lots of oars to propel them through the water. These oared galleys are going to give the Chesapeake Flotilla a bit of an advantage in the Chesapeake Bay, because of course not only is the Chesapeake Bay extremely shallow, there's lots of sandbars and other obstacles everywhere, but there are hundreds of miles of estuaries and rivers feeding into the bay, the perfect location for these small rowed vessels to come in and out and hit the British kind of in a guerrilla warfare style on the water. It's really a hit and run war in the Chesapeake, and the Chesapeake Flotilla is going to be very good at this. Robert Hamilton is going to serve as a sailing master aboard one of these vessels, and so he's going to take part in these kind of lightning raids where the Chesapeake Flotilla will come out of one of these estuaries, strike the British, and then very quickly retreat back to where the British cannot attack them. And this is going to go on through much of the summer of 1814. Eventually, though, British power becomes overwhelming in the Chesapeake Bay. The flotilla is bottled up to a point where they cannot no longer act. They're basically blockaded. And so Joshua Barney is going to give the command to scuttle the ships, to destroy the ships of his flotilla. And he, Hamilton, the other members of the Chesapeake Flotilla will march overland to take part in the defense of Washington. And they will arrive just in time to play a critical role at the Battle of Bladensburg, fought just outside of Washington, D.C., in what is now suburban Maryland. The Battle of Bladensburg is a crushing defeat for the American forces. Much of the American army there is made up of undisciplined, untrained, and untested militia who run very early on in the battle. In fact, it's so dispiriting that the British referred to the battle as the Bladensburg Races. But one of the few bright spots in the Battle of Bladensburg is going to come through the actions of Commodore Barney and his men of the Chesapeake Flotilla. Without their ships, they are going to help man cannons during the battle. They are going to help serve as Marines, taking up muskets, fighting in the line with the soldiers. And they are going to make a spirited stand. They are going to essentially fight through the day, almost to the last man, giving the rest of the American army a chance to withdraw from the battlefield and giving the government in Washington, D.C., including the President of the United States, time to evacuate the city and to save many of the important documents and other government property from British destruction. Now, according to legend, some of those important documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and so forth, were actually brought out here to the heritage area and were held in safety just outside of Leesburg. Now, after the war, we know just a little bit about Robert Hamilton. We know that he continues to work as a sailor. At one point in his long life, he's actually living in Montevideo, Uruguay. But by the 1850s, he's returned to the United States, and he's actually returned to Fauquier County. And when he passes in 1859, he is buried in the Warrenton Cemetery. Unfortunately, his headstone no longer exists. We don't know where exactly he's buried, but somewhere here. As you explore this cemetery, though, you will see dozens and dozens and dozens of gravestones marking the graves of veterans of almost every war in American history. There are other War of 1812 veterans here. There's veterans from the World Wars, veterans from the Civil War, and this is one of the reasons why cemeteries are such a fantastic historic resource, because we can walk through them and we can learn the stories of the individuals who are buried here and the part that they played in the history of the heritage area. So we are going to continue this journey today. We're going to talk about some World War I vets, some Civil War vets. We're really going to take it on up from the Revolutionary War to the 20th century. So I hope you'll join us in our next installment. Thanks for following along.